Hello, it's Chloe Bruce here again, the person who was speaking about her diagnosis of schizophrenia in the United Kingdom and various issues, not just stigma, but blatant abuse of psychiatric patients, including myself here in the United Kingdom. And I've also talked a little bit about my career and how that worked with this diagnosis, how I worked as a business journalist with a particular interest in the natural gas industry and energy overall. Also wrote somewhat about oil. And also I was an academic specialising in Russian politics and discussed how natural gas could be used as a political bargaining chip. And I've talked about this a little bit. I'm not researching now, as I've discussed, but anyway, that's just a bit of my background. Anyway, I said that I'd be discussing my, let's get straight, third stay in psychiatric care. I've talked about it somewhat, including libelous notes and and a waste of everyone's time of effort with some of the personnel there for the cash flow problems the NHS has. They don't seem to want to streamline the useless services out. They want to actually cut the proper professionals. And I'll discuss also this more in more detail. But anyway, I talked about the harrowing experience I had leading up to my hospitalisation. I was forced into hospital to be sectioned, and I've talked about how people barged into my flat and carted me off. And now I'm going to talk a bit about more to do with the lead up to this event, and you'll see that it is something they'll blame me on. And I do know the council just blames the tenant for everything, dead or alive. They blame them from anything from their cooking. They're not ventilating enough to their mental health. Anything they can get on them, they try. They clutch at straws to excuse their behaviour and bad services. Anyway, so as I said before, when I agreed to take this council flat, I'd complained to as many people as I could about the council services, and I will discuss such institutional behaviours in my forthcoming housing discussion, a bit more detail about homelessness here. And I've said how when I was in a B&B for the homeless for nearly a year, I was taken off my antipsychotic medications at that point, and I think it was because I was also withdrawn from my anti-epileptics and there'd be a risk of seizure, but actually I'm not sure. Anyway, so I was in this B&B for the homeless for nearly a year and had some horrific experiences, as I was going to talk about in a forthcoming video. But at this point I describe part of the psychiatric situation. It's a long story, as you can imagine, so I have to put it in all these bite-sized videos, but if you watch them, you will see how it all pieces together into a grim reality of horrific incompetence in British societal relationships with the government, and all the institutes are not functioning well currently. So when I got into this council flat, I had to, according to the rules, and this was true, I had to cite any, I agreed to take the flat, but I had to cite any things wrong with the flat within 2 weeks, and I did this immediately. And so I'll read this. As one of the concerns I raised was flagged up by the washing machine installer. And this was what I've discussed before, that the plumbing arrangement here meant that water would gush into the kitchen sink whilst I was using the washing machine. Anyway, I was very worried about the consequences for the building overall of this, and I complained about it and how dangerous it would be to have continual spillages onto the kitchen floor, but they did nothing about this. As I say, they completely ignored the issue. So after one such spillage occurred, afterwards a spillage occurred onto the kitchen floor, and a while later I received a letter from the council, Wandsworth Council, saying that they planned to evict me and that they would come in and take my stuff, in the most unpleasant, bullying, thuggish letter I have ever encountered. And to say they are thugs at this point, and it was not the only bullying letter I was getting. They have to understand that for some reason everyone wanted to try and panic me into giving away all my money to people I've never even heard of and can't say are credible at all in the way they approach the subject. I'd already told them the issue. Anyway, so this horrific letter arrived, and I was also being threatened. I'm going to take what's owed by an energy provider here. It's not a UK energy company. It's not a UK company. I had nothing to do with them. I didn't even have a contract with them. And other threatening letters as well. Anyway, I'll talk about all these threatening letters and heavy-handed approaches to completely innocent people in my housing discussion. Anyway, as it so happens, I'd already spent a lot of money on special delivery post. Bear in mind I'm on benefits, and it doesn't have anything over to pay for your own legal quests. It's not a question of paying a lawyer. You don't even have enough for the admin. I have to go out of pocket to fight my legal cause. So I spent a lot of money on special delivery post to the council to explain these issues, because I knew they wouldn't want to address them. And they ignored the whole complaint about brown mould, this difficulty with the overspill from the sink from the washing machine, and various other issues. And as so happens, it was up to them, when they wrote to me about this spillage, to be fully informed and to be civil and communicative, instead of behaving in this thuggish manner. I don't know why I deserved that level of hate, and they knew my disabilities. They were meant to take them into account, and I couldn't call because I didn't even have a telephone at the time. I literally didn't have a phone, and I couldn't call for my landline because of the sheer expense. I'd get into debt using my landline phone. I didn't even have a telephone, and they hadn't responded by post, and I told them to do everything by post. They didn't want to do anything in writing. They wanted to ring up and bully me on the phone to see my state of mind and how susceptible I was. So anyway, this was in the lead up to my hospitalisation and also during the COVID pandemic. Anyway, I was lying in bed, semi-naked in my bathrobe, when I heard the buzzer ring, and I'd had a lot of harassment through my buzzer from various people, and I'm very frightened. But anyway, they were emphatically buzzing, and I feared it was the council coming in to take my stuff as they had threatened. Anyway, I answered and didn't let the person in. It happened to be my mother, and she is someone I'm not in touch with because of her abusive behaviour, which I'd explained at the time of my application for housing. You have to describe your circumstances that led to your homelessness, and of course I had no financial support from my family of any meaningful nature, and neither would I expect any. It's up to the state to take the burden and not to pressure the families. And indeed, in fact, one survey has said that a lot of parents are developing mental health problems, having to put up their children. Anyway, so it's her abusive behaviour, and I'm not in touch with her, and I don't plan to be. And I didn't let her in, but a bit later, my front door in my flat and some floors up was knocked on. Anyway, they persuaded me to answer, and I could see she was a group of people outside. And she was outside with a group of men, and I answered the door, and I said, "Look, I really cannot let you in." And I tried to close. Bear in mind, I'd be sued if anything was done incorrectly with the plumbing or the flat, or any damage came. It would be my responsibility if I had sort of brought in people who I knew would be destructive in that manner. Anyway, so I said, "I really can't let you in," and I tried to close the door on this group of people. There were two men I've never had dealings with, and anyway. And one of the men was in plumbing robes, and he stuck his foot in the door, and as such pushed it open against my will. And he was a private plumber, and bear in mind I simply don't have the money for a private plumber. And the rules, you can look on the Wandsworth Council website, they say they don't actually carry out plumbing, we have to do it ourselves. They carry out certain faults, and this is simply unrealistic because a council tenant can't actually get plumbing insurance. You have to understand, we just don't have that kind of money. From our benefits, it wouldn't cover that kind of plumbing at all. And they can't say, I tried to get insurance from various plumbers, and they said, "I'm sorry, we can't insure a council flat." And as such, it's up to the council. It would be just a few pounds a month for plumbing insurance, but they literally don't do it. As such, it's the sole responsibility of the council. And they always just want to give you as little as possible. And they don't even give you that, unless there's something in it for them. Anyway, so this man, who I'd seen lurking in the areas it happened and touting for business. He was a private plumber, and I knew that. Anyway, he barged in with another man and my mother, and it was very difficult. I tried to defend myself. I went like this on one of the men's chest, but they didn't care, how distressed I was, and the fact that I was in my bathrobe and this plumber was coming at me. It was just grotesque, a big leering grin coming at me. And you have to trust your instincts about who to trust and not to trust. I simply would never have trusted him in a dark alley or anything like that. And so I fled to my bedroom and hid in there. And they went through to the kitchen until they'd left. And anyway, I went through and found they'd imposed a temporary fix on the situation, I think just by bunging a plunger in, which I could have done, but I didn't have a plunger. And they could have given me advice in a letter, try a plunger on it, because obviously even the smallest blockage, even with barely any blockage, the water starts to bubble up. But even the smallest blockage, even if it drains correctly in normal manner, and you can't even see a blockage because it's literally draining, as the washing machine comes in, it's so much water that even the smallest blockage can cause an overspill, especially you have washing up in the sink. As you can imagine, and I did, when the washing machine was on, we're culpable. We're fallible, because obviously one day we're going to accidentally have washing up in the sink at the same time as having the washing machine on, and we can't be expected to be on top form all time. It's this perfection policy they have in all institutes, when they're hardly perfect themselves as people. Anyway, so they put in this temporary fix as far as I could tell. But anyway, despite this, a few weeks later, a group of men took off the lock on my door while I was in and entered my flat. Just a group of men, 5, 6, 7 men, sort of wearing blue. And I don't know why they had to put blue on, but I think they were pretending to be police officers or something. I'd never met them, and I think one of them was recognisable as this plumber, but I can't be entirely sure because he's wearing a different outfit, blue. Anyway, so this man, because they barged in, I needed the lavatory urgently, and I ran in. I said, I've just got to go to the lavatory, and they're going, Chloe, Chloe, and they were trying to stop me even going to the lavatory. So I was in the lavatory, and I was pushing the door. I was terrified, and tried to actually stop them from putting a chair in the door by putting the handle up and down. I was petrified, and I thought I didn't know what they were going to do. I thought they were going to put me onto the streets, because they were just taking the lock off. And anyway, so I continued to read. Anyway, so I was on the lavatory, and I had to warn them not to come in. And I tried to make myself unattractive to them, which you're meant to do. In all rape training, you're meant to make yourself as unattractive to the man, because they go for little girly people, if you can imagine that. So I had to warn them, and I started to say, don't come in, I'm doing a poo, which is actually quite true. I had to urgently empty my bowels in the lavatory. Anyway, nevertheless, one of the men came in, and he opened the door, despite me obviously being terrified they were going to do that. Anyway, I came out of the lavatory, and they changed the lock, as though pushing me out onto the street. So I took a look at the door, and I thought, I can't leave. I can't let them win by running off frightened. Actually, they didn't care if I lived or died, and that's a clear fact for anyone. Anyway, so they put the new key on the floor, and I had to pick up the key from the floor. And while I was in the lavatory, as I came out, I saw they were potting around in the kitchen. I didn't know why they were in there. But anyway, then again, a few weeks later, as though that's not enough, several people entered, and with this Nazi officer who I described before, this self-confessed Nazi, who said, yes, I am a Nazi, or yes, when I asked, are you a Nazi? And I've told you already about this in a previous video. Anyway, so they all entered in, I've told you about that, and as such, they dragged me into the streets in my bathrobe with no underwear on, and with my bathrobe open for all the neighbours to see and all the pervs in the area to video me. And so anyway, I was put into Springfield Hospital for yet more abuse. I literally don't know why I deserved this. I don't know why anyone deserves this. But they will find justice, and I will find justice for these people who have had to endure this also. Mark my words. Anyway, so in hospital, I was just sitting on my bed, and the group of men and women, presumably staff, came in and stripped me naked for no reason at all, not saying a word. It was disgusting, and I now think, looking back, that this was on behalf also, they're all excited about the press being there, because I've talked about how BBC Three's Stacey Dooley was filming patients in various sort of situations, and without their consent, at least not my consent, and lying and saying we consented. And now I think they forced me to be naked for the sake of this film, and for some kind of sextortion racket, quite literally. However bizarre it sounds, it's not that bizarre if you know how creepy these people are. Anyway, it's also in hospital, not only were I stripped naked, they forced me to take drugs I didn't recognise, and would have maybe given me seizures because I've had abreactions and things before. They didn't bother telling me what any of the drugs were, and it does actually harm an unborn baby. They didn't bother with any of that. And they committed me to an injection that you can't come off slowly. You have to commit to it for a year, and they didn't bother me telling me that either. In fact, if they'd wanted to persuade me to take oral medication, they needed to explain exactly what the medication was, what it would do for me, asked if I'd taken it before and had a good reaction, and then they'd said, I'm sorry, if you don't take your oral medication, you're going to be committed to a jab. That might have, at a pinch, persuaded me. But these are thugs in a hospital, and they will never, ever succeed again in doing this to someone if I can help it. Anyway, so they forced me to take drugs I didn't recognise in a sea of incompetence with bizarre occupational therapists trying to access my bank details. and get me into cars alone in the way I've said. And anyway, a woman called Eva was the occupational therapist who wouldn't let me out of the hospital and organised a cleaner. And there was a sinister man called Jonathan who wanted to jab me in the flat, take me into the flat and come into my flat and jab me there on a regular basis without CCTV or anything like that. And who else was there? I don't know all their names. Anyway, that's 2 of them in occupational therapy at the very least. And there was Andrew, who wanted to do my freedom pass for me even when I said I wasn't eligible, and then just dropped the whole thing. But anyway, he had to find something to do to justify the hours he was doing, I suppose. Anyway, that's 3 of them. Anyway, as I said, they wouldn't let me leave, I said in previous videos, until I agreed to this key. And they're still refusing to say who these thieving cleaners are, who took things that were precious to me and utterly useless to them, as many cynical, unpleasant people do. Anyway, I survived hospital, actually, just about, thanks to very helpful cleaning staff and caterers. And if they hadn't been there, there'd have been no order whatsoever. But I can say, in regard of Stacey Dooley's portrayal of the mentally ill in Springfield Hospital, I didn't see, personally, a single patient hit a member of staff ever. Not one patient. In fact, in all my hospital stays, I've been attacked by patients, but I cannot say I've ever seen a member of staff being attacked by a patient. And I know that if they do get upset with the patient, they drag them off for an ejection. And I've literally never seen that. And some of the staff that you see portrayed in Stacey Dooley, I've never even met. And yet I'm in the same clip as though I was in the hospital. And I'm juxtaposed with these people I've never even met. And the woman going, ouch, ouch, I've just been hit. This nurse, who I'm going to identify if I can help it. I can actually say they juxtaposed her complaining about a patient slapping her with me lying on my bed, and I've said I don't even know they were secretly filming me in my bedroom, in my bed, and they're trying to make out with this juxtaposition that I might have been now solitary confinement because I hit her. I can just say I've never even met the woman in my life, yet she seems to be talking knowledgeably about all patients. And it's the bizarrest portrayal I've ever known of any mental health hospital, that they go on hitting the staff. It's simply not true. You can be attacked by other patients if you're a patient, but on the whole they hide away and don't get into that situation. As I said, they cowardly hide in locked rooms. And quite frankly, if you're incarcerating people and not explaining why and lying about them in their notes, I don't know what they expect, quite frankly. But anyway, for the record, I've never hit a member of staff. I've kicked, as I said, 2 police officers, and I slapped this man on the chest, and that's the extent of my violent outbursts that are now a long-going lack of legality in the whole system. Anyway, so that's part of that. Let's see how I'm with time. Anyway, so these cleaning staff and caterers held the fort there and did the real work. Anyway, as I've said before, the doctor forced me to get in touch with this mother and yelled at me, saying, I've got to call your mother. And he's the one I think portrayed in Stacey Dooley. I think he's called Peter Hughes. Anyway, that's him. And he sort of got this mother fixation himself. I don't know why he thinks my mother's perfect just because his is, or anything like that. But anyway, that's him. And I said I didn't want her touch, and he in touch, and they forced me to get in touch with my mother. And as such, she was traipsing into the hospital during lockdown, even lockdown of summer, potentially affecting everyone. And she has actually said she had long COVID. Anyway, I think even the BBC may have actually said, filmed this whole part of me being stripped and injected into my posterior. They pulled down my underwear and just inject me. Anyway, they have. I have since complained again to the BBC, and they said they would look, but they're going to take a long time because they're processing vast numbers of complaints. Anyway, so I've already explained. I'll talk more about the complaints process. But in view of all this, I've tried to tell the powers about the danger of allowing unvetted adults onto the ward with people that are vulnerable. And I've also tried to tell an organisation here in Britain called the Parliamentary Ombudsman, who are meant to examine these health atrocities. And they were so indifferent and insulting that I had to ask what their credentials were. They resembled nothing lawful to me. And so today I rang their main line and I asked the woman there who answered. And I spoke to her, and she said the people there, like her, did not necessarily even have a degree, and yet they're working on behalf of the Parliament to investigate atrocities in health. They closed the investigation before it's even started, and they've actually said, sorry, you have to be dead or gravely injured before we can look into it. And they're going to wait for everyone to die of these people before they act. That's not lawful. Anyway, I'm sure it is, and no one knows any common sense. I do. In these institutes, the common sense is they can't get away with it. People die, and they'll die at the hands of these people. I can prove it. I have every bit of evidence, but they don't want me in a court. They want me in a hospital because they're going to look incredibly embarrassed about their housing situation. Anyway, as I say, these people are meant to be trained enough to know sexual abuse. I had to talk about my sex abuse, all these things to these people, and they don't have a degree or any credentials relevant to law, as far as I can possibly tell. Tell me if you do. You can get in touch and say, yes, I do have a law credential, but quite frankly, then I'll get your law reference number and manage to claim about you to a relevant ombudsman, but you haven't got a degree. I can't actually complain about you to your association or your union. It's one of the catches. They never want to be known. They're the grey men of London, always just hiding in the smog because they're so grey and boring. They hide in the smog, yet they're incredibly important to themselves. And they are mainly all men, by the way. Anyway, I want to give an example of how important it is to actually have proper, decent approaches to hospitals. And letting unvetted adults in is a very serious situation. And I can give an example. In my case, and this is a firm fact, even though my father is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and my mother was at least, and he was at least too, they're still alive, a London social worker, I had to endure a childhood. I've talked about the verbal abuse and other things and sex abuse I've suffered then, but also I have to just say one thing. The family didn't even care, as I've already said, about me being sexually abused. And there was a party. I've tried to tell the police this, and I don't know how well they'll be able to investigate, but anyway, I'm hoping there's lots of investigation. Sexual men and transvestites to come to. These are people she knew through her work. And I was the only child there. And this older relative told me that all the men there had HIV. And that night I was sexually abused by one of them when he grabbed my rear end and asked how old I was. And another one told me I was voluptuous. Anyway, so the next day I asked this relative if this man was one of the ones. I told her about this situation and asked if he was one of the ones who had HIV. And she would, yes, like this. Yes, and that was the extent to which she cared that I might have contracted this condition at 14. And my doctor father didn't bother getting anyone checked. He didn't care about this happening at all. And himself checked, even though he was going to hospitals and working with children. And I can say this for the benefit of all children. You can complain about a doctor because child after beating her to the floor, and I remember her face going peculiar and rubbery. And no, oh sorry I did that, no excuses, it was her hard put. She was always the hard done by. She was always the victim, and yet she has to conclude something about a 20-year-old doing that to a 15-year-old. You walk into the nearest police station and apologise, but she has no apologies for anyone. And I want to once again point out that other people born into this family or to this family are lovely and wonderful people. It's just very difficult, to say how difficult it is to be up against coercive control, and since childhood it's very difficult. They mean every bit of the harm they gave you, as far as I can possibly tell, in terms of their remorse. Anyway, and these are the people that in psychiatry inflicted on me and tried to get me back in touch with, and allowed them access to hospitals and during lockdown. And it was only when I left hospital that I read all these libelous notes. Fabrication of their mind. It's half based on sort of truth, so I can tell it's me they're talking about, but it's absurd. And as I already mentioned, they said that I defecated in my kitchen sink and ate my own excrement. And when I pushed the subject, they agreed to say it was the plumber who said it. And presumably all these men who all looked at me on the loo were all still dining out about seeing me on the lavatory. I don't know what they did in my kitchen. I don't know if they put excrement in it, but I certainly didn't see it. I don't know why they went into my kitchen, but anyway, things are missing. Anyone want to know who they are? They won't get away with it, and I'm sitting here like a sitting duck. I'm not a sitting duck. I'm going to tell you something. You can't do that to women in this country. And that's a fact. Anyone who's tempted to barge into a woman's flat, you'll get punished. Don't do it. Anyway, the worst thing I saw in my notes was a bizarre discussion. As I said before, I was diagnosed with epilepsy some years after being diagnosed with schizophrenia in Vienna by an EEG analysis. Of it because of aggression, and it's not even for mood disorders. I don't have aggression. I'm not. This is just absurd. Obviously, you're going to be aggressive if they hurl insults at you and lock you up without explanation and strip you. And I wasn't aggressive in hospital. I've told when people barge into my flat, that's when I try and defend my property and my womb, as I've discussed. I can't not defend myself against these people. My mother has no business coming in, and they have no business unleashing this mother on me. And for the record, when I asked her why she was there, and how she, not why she was there, that I knew actually, but how she came to be there, she said, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. And you have to bear in mind, I was standing there semi-naked, and she allowed all these men to come in. And I can't even describe this person in my mind. And I hope she's listening, and I hope she'll stay the hell away from this building in future. Anyway, and I'm taking action, but it's very difficult. They keep saying, having put you around in circles, you have to go to this department, that department, this department. They then say, sorry, time out, you can't prosecute, it's too late. Having sent you around in for decades, or at least for many, many years. Anyway, what they said was that this anti-epileptic was for a mood disorder. And anyone who knows epilepsy and the drugs, I cannot even describe how dangerous this is. If you get this wrong, this drug, anyway, either withdrawing it or by giving it, or withdrawing it or giving it, in the way they've described, I'm afraid to say you're not just brain damaged, you might be permanently brain damaged forever. And that's how dangerous these people are, with these bizarre aspirations to be the medical doctor superior. And I still don't know what they gave me in hospital. Anyway, as I say, I risk being brain damaged to this day by these incompetent NHS workers, and as such I can't actually go into any hospital with that level of incompetence. And this is a fact. I can't actually see any doctor unless they acknowledge immediately. Literally, I don't care if I've got a broken bone, I'm not going in an ambulance, I'm not going anywhere, because I'm afraid to say, it's not just what's in my womb, I can't have brain damage. I know the pain of brain damage. You have to understand how cynical and incompetent everyone in the NHS is, because not one of them is bothering to speak to me. I'm the journalist, but they want to speak to Stacey Dooley or something about this. Why don't they speak to me? I'm a journalist. They can speak to me, but they don't. They don't want to. They actually want to sit by default. All these top men in medicine, they're by default the most selfish people. They're by default a fascist themselves, because they never, ever bother to say to the woman, I'm sorry about your baby. I think they should go to hell. Anyway, that's how I feel. I know every woman will feel that when they know that I have high risk of dying in childbirth. I have a very high risk because of my history of seizures. I can't even describe this baby, because I have to take my life over the baby's, and I can't tell you that decision. And I'm sorry, I have to abstain from sex. I can't have men coming in and risking that level of harm to my baby. If they get me pregnant, I can't abort that poor baby, and I die in childbirth. And I want to say anyway about these elections coming up, if Tory or Labour think I'm voting for them, get another life. I'm going to say about these weird men of Whitehall too, also sort of in as well, all the right look or something, and the right gender as the case might be. All I know is they've got one big house, one big red house in Mayfair between the lot of them, and the greenhouses, their greenhouses rather, never even enter the equation. All they have is one big red house for them all after throwing a 6, and that's all I can say about these weird men of Whitehall. I just have to say to you, you are never going to be forgiven, and ask God to forgive you, because I cannot, and I don't think any woman in this country will, quite frankly. If they're of normal, decent humour, then I don't think they will. Take a hard look at yourselves and think about the babies that haven't been born.